Time Hardy turned seriously to poetry as the 19th century turned into the 20th century, he was already a very distinguished novelist, one of the most important novelists of the last half of the 19th century. Indeed, one of the most important novelists in the English language. Uh, Tess of D'Urberville's is often considered his masterpiece, but you might have also come across him through his other novels like The Mayor of Casterbridge or Return of the Native or Woodlanders or Jude the Obscure. But Hardy, for various reasons, turned to poetry right at the turn of the 20th century, and he became just as important as a poet as he was as a novelist. Now, one context for thinking about Hardy as a poet is to look back at some of the poets that we studied early in this course, namely Wordsworth and Keats. Recall that Wordsworth had a keen desire to connect intimately with the natural world. And when he was unable to do so, he often despaired, but more often than not, he was able to do so. So Wordsworth has an ideal of harmony, an ideal that the human psyche, the human spirit, the human soul, call it what you will, is capable of emerging with salubrious forces coursing through the natural world. So ultimately, Wordsworth, even though he explores melancholy in great and subtle detail, is a poet of hope. Keats also yearns for union, uh, not so much for the natural world, but for objects of beauty, uh, artificial in some cases. We can think, of course, of Ode on a Grecian Urn. But then we can think of the poem Ode to a Nightingale, which does show Keats yearning for a natural creature, but of course we know that the nightingale might not quite be real. It might be an ideal or a dream or a reverie. The point is that Keats also yearns to connect with something other than himself and hopes that that connection can somehow heal, can help him avoid melancholy, to help him achieve joy. In his odes, his speaker doesn't really connect with the environment in the way that Wordsworth speakers often do. Now look at Hardy as a poet. Hardy as a poet more or less gives up that hope that one can connect with some sort of healing energy. Why? Um, by the time we get to Hardy, almost 100 years later than Wordsworth and Keats were writing, really more like 75 years later, um, Hardy has, of course, become aware of Darwin. He's become aware of the Industrial Revolution. He's very aware, in other words, of all of those forces that shape poets like Tennyson and poets like Browning. Um, and like Tennyson and Browning, he had serious doubts about the possibility of there being some kind of cosmic order that is ultimately in favor of humankind. Hardy's basic assumption was that there is a chronic gap between what humans want and what humans get. That we go through life with hopes that we can find fulfillment. We go through life maybe with hopes that there's some kind of um, deity out there looking out for us. But ultimately, the world is utterly indifferent to our hopes. Uh, it's random, unpredictable, and it's indifferent, doesn't care. This scholars often call, in speaking of Hardy, cosmic irony. And cosmic irony can really take two forms. One form is what you want out of life, you'll get the opposite of. That's a kind of cosmic irony, uh, constant situational irony. What I want, I get the opposite of. Well, that's kind of hopeful in a way because at least there's some kind of order in play that when I say yes, the world says no. But another kind of cosmic irony is horrifying, and that is that there is no order. Uh, Utter randomness is at play in the universe. And what I want, well, maybe I will get it. Probably not. But ultimately, nature is blind. The cosmos is blind. It just does what it does and doesn't know what it's doing. Just like throwing a bunch of sand up in the wind. That's what it's like. And therefore, to have any hope at all that things might go like I would want them to go, is futile. But of course, Hardy knows that we can't give up these hopes. So this is really where his poems live. They explore this cosmic irony, this gap between what we want and what we get, and we see that most prevalently in a poem like Hap, which actually starts out with the speaker saying, "You know what? If there were some God, there's some power that were set against me, was out to get me, as terrible as that would be, that would be okay, because I would at least know that some order is at play, even if it's an order that's out to get me." But he says, no, not so. How arrives at joy lies slain, and why unblooms the best hope ever sown? Crass casuality obstructs the sun and rain, and dicing time for gladness casts a moan. These purblind doomsters had as readily strown blisses about my pilgrimage as pain. So happenstance, chance, is ultimately what rules the universe. So anything can happen. And it's interesting that even though the speaker, by the time we get to the last stanza, is saying that nothing's in charge, he still can't get rid of that language of hope. So he calls the random forces of the universe purblind doomsters. So he's still personifying these random powers of the universe, suggesting that he has this slight hope still that there are doomsters out to get him, even though they're half blind. So the Hap is a perfect example of this cosmic irony. It starts out with that first kind of cosmic irony: the world's out to get me. It says no when I say yes. The opposite of what I expect is always going to be the case. And then that darker kind of cosmic irony comes in at the end with there's no yes or no. Things just happen for no reason whatsoever. And I could just as easily live as die, find joy as pain, can't predict. But still, and this is where Hardy's kind of work as a psychologist comes into play, I still can't get rid of the hope that there is some ordering principle in the world. So that's ultimately what makes Hardy's poems so layered, is that almost all of them have at least two levels of awareness. One is, okay, no one's in charge. Okay, maybe someone's in charge. So look for that as you go through his poems. Another great example of Hardy's irony at play would be Are You Digging at My Grave?, which is an example of this cosmic irony, but it's much more personal. In Hap, we see a speaker sort of meditating metaphysically on the meaning or lack thereof of the world. And here in Hap, it's a much homelier setting. It's this dead woman who's speaking, and she senses a presence on her grave. And like, is it my loved one come to plant flowers? No. Is it my family come to commemorate me? No. Is it my enemy? No. Friend, no. No one cares about you anymore. The voice up above her, the presence on her grave, tells her this. No one cares about you anymore. People have forgotten you. And then she says, well, who are you? And this voice says, oh, I'm your dog. And she says, oh, you came back? You came back to see me? He's like, no, I dug upon your grave to bury a bone in case I should be hungry near this spot when passing on my daily trot. I'm sorry, but I quite forgot it was your resting place. So heartbreaking. Again, this hope that we'll be remembered after we're dead, say, but no one cares. Even the dog doesn't care. You become nothing to the dog, but your grave has become a place where you might bury a bone. So this gets to that kind of deep psychology that it's almost like we're wired to believe in a world that will never give us what we believe in. So it's that gap. So the cosmic irony can work on this sort of philosophical level like you see in Hap, but also I think more interestingly when Hardy dramatizes this, as he does in this poem, and also in other poems like Neutral Tones. I think that's when the cosmic irony becomes really most powerful.